Now. Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm going to be your host, Jim R. And today we have our guest, Renee L. That's going to be telling us her story of addiction and recovery. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Jim?
Doing all right. I'm doing well. And we have a group member, Sarah. I want to mention her. She loves it when I say, let's dive in. So let's dive into your story and tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe let's start as we usually do with your childhood.
Okay. Well, I grew up on the state line border between Wisconsin and Illinois, so Beloit area. And I would imagine there's probably not too many people familiar with Beloit, but it's kind of an armpit of a city.
You say an armpit?
Yeah, it's not a super special place.
I've heard the same thing people call, I'm in New Jersey, and I've heard the same term for us.
Yeah. Well, think of it in the same vein. Small town, high crime. It's on the traffic way between Chicago and Madison, where a lot of people try and move to get out of Chicago. So a lot of people end up stuck in between, and Beloit is one of those places. And so lots of gang activity, lots of crime. Oddly enough, my using story didn't really start there. I grew up there,
Did you have both parents?
I had a mom and a stepfather. My biological father took off when I was about 2. Grew up with 2 white parents, which was a little odd for a little kid of color. So my identity was always a little in flux as a kid. My dad is Black, so I grew up with his family who's Black as part of my life, but that's a whole nother story. They were abusive, so it wasn't a great experience.
How were they abusive?
In about every way you could think of. They were extraordinarily religious, but in a pretty abusive way. And my stepfather, or not my stepfather, my grandfather was sexually abusive. My grandmother knew what was going on. So there was just a lot of really messed up dynamics. Yeah. So that wasn't a great experience with them. And then I was at home kind of living what looked like a very middle class existence with my 2 white parents, but with super heavy depression and anxiety. And
was it diagnosed at the time, or you just look back now and recognize it?
No, it got diagnosed by the time I was about 11. And I started seeing my first therapist at 11. I developed my first eating disorder, well, really by the time I was 6, but by the time I was 11, it was diagnosed. So I had a lot of therapeutic intervention by the time I was 11, but nothing really helped. They put me on antidepressants, etc. I don't think anybody realized it was trauma. I didn't really understand the full extent of the trauma until I went to college and started having flashbacks and other PTSD related symptoms. I really kind of fell apart in college. Didn't finish college, and instead I moved up to Madison. And that's when I started partying. That's when I started drinking heavily and dabbled in some harder drugs and just kind of became a weekend warrior. And that went on for a long time. Ended up on disability because of my mental health.
Taking a step back real quick, what were your relationships like growing up with friends and schoolmates and things like that? Was it anything they noticed at school? What was going on with home life?
No, and the relations weren't good. I went to a very white school. I was one of only two kids of color in the whole school. There was definite racism. Um, I didn't understand at the time that it was racism, but it was pretty blatant, actually. The kids on the playground would call me all kinds of racist names. I just didn't recognize what they were because my mother wasn't really teaching me about racism and what to recognize. She didn't really, I think, expect that to happen. So, and I wasn't telling her what they were calling me, and they're calling me Black Crayon and all kinds of horrible
Wow.
names at school. And
That's why they say kids could be cruel.
yeah, so I grew up with a lot of bullying. Um, and it wasn't confined to the kids. I had a teacher smack me in sixth grade. I had, it was not a great growing up, in terms of the school and the kids, other kids. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was really a loner. I read a lot. I watched a lot of TV, and I ate. So
Was food an addiction for you also?
it was my first addiction, really, that and escape of any kind, like fantasy books, TV. Um, it was really loose, anything that would get me away from reality. So um, I binged, like I said, starting at about age 6, I would binge on food. Um, and then once I got into my 20s, started purging as well. So really developed a full blown eating disorder. Wow. I mean, by 6, but with pretty more lethal consequences, I guess I would say, um, by the time I got into my 20s. So, yeah, there wasn't any real safe haven in my growing up. Um, there wasn't really anybody I could talk to. My mom was very self-occupied, I guess I would say. She had her own trauma growing up, which I learned about later in life. And she was just trying to make the best of things. She was in a really unhappy marriage. Um, and so she just really wasn't there for me. I knew she loved me. And I think that was my saving grace, honestly, my mom's love. Because I did grow up knowing
You grew up knowing what?
somebody loved me.
Okay. And that's important.
So I think it was important. I think it gave me a spark to survive. Because honestly, with everything I did go through between my grandparents, my the bullying, and then I also had some sexual abuse through a babysitter. Um, it was a lot for a kid to go through, and I think my mom's love of me, I think, gave me that, like, some belief inside that I was like worth staying alive. So, because I was pretty suicidal in my teens, but I never went through with it. Now that doesn't mean I didn't try later on in life, but
In
um,
your teens, was it just thoughts and things like that creeping in?
that's when they first started. Yeah. And then by the time I was in my 20s, I did attempt several times. So once the partying started and things felt more bleak, I think, after I dropped out of college, moved to Madison, started drinking a lot, depression was worse, flashbacks, um, eating disorder got worse. It just started spiraling.
So you graduate high school, you go to college, you dropped out of college, and now you're living in Madison, you said?
hmm
What were you doing to survive day to day? Did you have a job, or how'd you live?
I moved up there with a job, canvassing for Greenpeace.
Okay.
um, every college student's dream job. But I quickly deteriorated. And like I said, I ended up not able to work, and then applied for disability and received disability because of my mental health. Um, so for a long time, I worked very part-time and lived on disability most of my 20s, and then slowly started being able to work again in my late 20s. And yeah, then I ended up in working in insurance of all things, but it paid the bills. Held a lot of different jobs, bookstores, daycare, not a real profession or career, but a lot of different kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
And eventually I landed in insurance.
So what age did you say it was right around this time that your use got heavy? What were your drugs of choice or drug of choice?
In my 20s and most of my 30s, it was alcohol. And I really was a weekend partier. I would drink during the week, so I use that term loosely. It was anytime I could binge drink, really. And working a lot of retail jobs and such, it was anytime I didn't have to be at work in the morning. But it was a lot of alcohol, a lot of weed. Like I said, I dabbled in cocaine and a couple other sort of random. Somebody gave me some mushrooms, like just little things here and there. But I really was confined to alcohol most of my early using career. So a good 15, 20 years, I just consisted that way. It didn't get bad. It never got to a point where I had any sort of legal consequences or lost a job or anything like that. I just kept doing my thing. And I eventually went back to work and I was working full time. And then one day I found out after drinking and having picked up somebody in a bar that I was pregnant. And that sort of tilted the whole axis of my life. I gave birth to my daughter in 2002. Her name is Noelle. She's the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. She caused a lot of changes in my life. I had gained a lot of weight over the years from the drinking and the binging. And I decided to have bariatric surgery in 2008 because I was really not able to kind of keep up with her. Taking care of an infant on your own is exhausting, and I was extra exhausted because I was carrying extra weight. So I had gastric bypass surgery in 2008, and that also sort of tilted my axis back the other way. My life kept doing 180s. I wasn't emotionally prepared for the sort of mental changes that would come with that surgery.
What do you mean by mental changes that come along with it?
I think when you go down from, and I was almost 400 pounds at this point.
Wow. So you were really, really large.
I was large. And I lost over half my body weight. And when I got down to a quote unquote normal weight. And I suddenly had a very different experience in life. And let me tell you, if you don't believe that there's sizeism in the world, go from being 400 pounds to being, 150. And you'll see how differently the world treats you. People opened doors for me. People gave me seats. People talked to me and said hi. People didn't give me dirty looks when I ordered regular food. It was just odd the way the whole world changed because of the way I looked. And that was really disconcerting. And I also started getting a lot of attention, like unwanted affection from, anything from people catcalling on the street to people asking me out. And I didn't like that. I had spent, at this point, 30 some years hiding in my own skin. And I wasn't emotionally prepared to deal with the attention. It was very unsettling and made me feel very vulnerable.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize what it feels like. I do. I wasn't 400 pounds, but growing up, I was very heavy. And then when I lost weight, the way people treated me different, girls treated me different, just everything in my life changed. And like you said, it made you realize people treat you different and it sucks.
Yeah. So I had some reaction to that. I drank more than I had before, and they don't tell you this, but when you have part of your stomach and intestines removed, the alcohol is actually able to go straight through your stomach into your large intestine, like within a matter of minutes, which gives you sort of an instant drunk. So I was able to get very drunk very quickly, to the point where I gave myself alcohol poisoning quite a few times, made myself very ill. And I was not a person that blacked out. I never blacked out, no matter how drunk I got. I'd have some fuzzy memories, but I didn't ever black out and do something I don't remember. At least in part, and but I sure remember giving myself alcohol poisoning and how sick I was and how difficult it was. So I started drinking a lot more, and I started kind of having a re-emergence of PTSD. Which, I'd had many years of therapy by this point, so PTSD had sort of been under control for me, but it's just opened it up again. So I really struggled when I lost all the weight with PTSD and more drinking, and my eating disorder got really bad. Only this time I just stopped eating. So it just went completely the other way.
That sounds like body image plays a real part in your day-to-day mental makeup.
It has for a long time. It's nowadays it's something I work on, but it was just so uncomfortable to be so visible. I wanted to become invisible again. And so I just stopped eating, and I was like, I'm just gonna disappear. And I lost even more weight, and ended up in eating disorder treatment multiple times for refusing to eat. And the whole 9 yards, the feeding tube, the forced treatment and everything. So yeah, that's when my story really starts to get interesting. When I started going in and out of eating disorder treatment.
What happened? What made it? What kicked off the interesting part?
So I was in, let me get my dates right. So I went to eating disorder treatment and got some help, came home, had met some friends, some of whom I started dating, got into a relationship, was happy, so happy that we decided that we were, meant to be together long term. We got the idea that we wanted to have a baby. So my partner and I at the time were both female. So we asked a friend if he would be the donor for our baby. And I got pregnant because I knew I could. I'd already done it once. So this was in 2013. I got pregnant with my second child. Unfortunately, I lost my son at the beginning of the second trimester. And it was a pretty devastating loss. It was totally unexpected. Even though I was a little bit older, I was in my late 30s. I'd had a very normal pregnancy the first time, got pregnant really easy. So I took it really hard. And since, I've already mentioned I have pretty major depression anyway, I fell into a very severe depression. And I also started having chronic pain, just all over my body after I had the miscarriage. And what ended up happening is some super smart doctor prescribed me narcotics. Like in a Costco size bottle. And continued to prescribe me narcotics for the next year. So between 2013 and 2014, my whole world turned upside down. I became addicted to narcotics.
What narcotics? Which ones?
Started with Vicodin, just plain old Vicodin. And eventually what happened was my mother, who was very ill at the time and on hospice, moved in with me because she needed a caretaker, and I started taking her meds. So then we moved on to morphine and Dilaudid and whatever else I could snag from her bundle. So I was taking hundreds of milligrams of narcotics a day, depending on the narcotic, mostly OxyContin and morphine. And then by the late 2014, my partner was informed by my therapist what was going on. It all came out in therapy. So I ended up in my first rehab in 2014.
Was that something you wanted to do?
I don't think I would have chosen it. I was not ready to stop.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah. But being caught the way I was, I felt a lot of shame. And so I think I was willing to get clean for the people around me. You know, I had a teenage daughter, or like a tween age daughter. Um, I had my mom living with me and my partner, and they all were like very disappointed, and I was ashamed. And so I was like, yeah, of course I'll go to rehab. This was my first experience really being called out as an addict. Um, so I went to rehab. I was in rehab for 3 months. It was a really good rehab. They were dual diagnosis. They dealt a lot with my trauma and actually helped me quite a bit deal with the trauma. And I came out not using, you know, and I didn't use for over a year. So they introduced me to the 12-step groups, and I attended pretty regularly for a while. And then I stopped. It just didn't sit well with me, partly because of my religious abuse growing up. The whole higher power thing was real hard for me to get behind. And so even though I was sort of paying lip service to everything that I was doing in the program, and I was working the steps, and I had a sponsor and all that stuff, eventually the sort of hypocrisy of what I was saying kind of drove me out. So I eventually I just stopped going, and yeah. So
What's your take on that? Did you find those 12-step classes, or not classes, meetings beneficial? I hear a lot of people say what you just said, which is they just kind of go through the motions.
Well, I have more experience coming up with 12 steps, and I'm still partially involved in the 12 steps today. So I think there's benefits to 12-step groups. Do I think they're the end all and be all of recovery? No. And I think that is partly because of their take on spirituality, which they try to make sound very all-encompassing, but which in fact is pretty limited when you look at it. So I would say that they have their place, and they've helped a lot of people. And so I don't think we should poo-poo them as like an option. But they're not everybody's option. So in 2014 and 15, you know, I was getting into recovery and things were going well. And then I sort of stopped going to meetings, and my eating disorder got really bad again, and I stopped eating, and I ended up back in eating disorder treatment. And I met a woman named Emily, who I became really close with. And we became like instant best friends. And when I left treatment, I left before her, I promised that we'd stay in touch, and we did. And through the course of like the next year or so, 2014 into early 2015, we stayed in touch, and she eventually reached out and let me know, because she was also an addict, that she had relapsed and been in this relationship with this guy who was being really abusive, and she needed help to sort of get out of that situation. So me and my then partner at the time, I was in treatment at the time, but my partner went and picked her up, and she came to stay with us. So that was in 2014 or 2015. she came to stay with us. And that's she came to us for help, and I have a lot of regret looking back over the years, that we couldn't really provide her what she came for. I was too sick, really, with my own stuff going on, and my partner at the time was too worried about me. Um, but what ended up happening was this. I fell in love with Emily, and Emily with me. And so that eventually drove a wedge between me and my partner. And even though we had been in an open relationship, what really drove the wedge home was that Emily and I relapsed together. So Emily was my introduction to the world of intravenous drugs.
What type of IV drugs? Anything specific?
Crack cocaine and then heroin. So
How did did you like the drugs?
loved them.
Yeah.
Loved them. I mean, I don't think there's an addict alive who wouldn't tell you if they couldn't have the high of the first time they got high, without all the consequences, that they wouldn't go back to using.
Yeah.
You
It's one thing we tend to forget is that we like them.
Yeah, we did them because they feel good. The problem is the feel good doesn't last, and all the other shit that comes with it. Pardon my French.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And a lot of the stuff is yeah, there's just a lot of baggage that comes along with it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. So it didn't take very long. Sorry, my dogs are barking.
That's okay.
Stop in a second. It didn't take very long for things to get real bad.
I know this might be a silly question, but when you were doing the drugs, because you said she introduced you, was she shooting you up or did she teach you how to do it yourself?
She did it for me for a really long time. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember the day that she looked at me and said, I wonder what, or I wish I had known what it was like to party with you. And I didn't know at the time that she was already using. And I said, yeah, I've wondered that too. And she said, really? And that was all it took. And 2 days later, we were sitting on my bed and she was shooting me up with cocaine. And I knew the second it hit my veins that I was hooked and I was not going to stop.
I've heard that a lot also, that the instantaneous high really gets people. There was a gentleman, his father shot him up for his 17th birthday. He said it just like you. He goes, the minute it hit my vein, I was hooked.
Yeah.
The minute it hit that bloodstream, he said.
It was like everything I'd been searching for my whole life opened up in a second. And I was like, this is what I've been looking for.
Yeah, it goes back to
like that instant.
In the AA book, the big book, it still has a lot of stuff that relates. And Bill W. said that when he had that first drink in a social setting, it opened up all types of doors. He was able to talk to people. He didn't have anxiety. He wasn't so nervous, all that type of stuff that he used to feel. I think the term they said was, I had arrived, or that's the term he used. He felt like he had arrived.
Yeah.
And I know that feeling of not being so nervous around people anymore. I think a lot of us addicts have social anxiety and we do a lot of our self-medication for that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's certainly the case for me too. It was part of my anxiety. So, I I wasn't even all the way down yet when I asked when we could do it again. And it probably took a month before we were shooting up daily. And I went through my savings. Um, my former partner left me. Um, I lost the lease on our apartment. My daughter moved out to her godmother's. We started stealing food because we spend all our money on dope. And it was probably about that time that we started shooting up the speedballs. And eventually Emily overdosed really badly and ended up in the hospital. Took 14 doses of Narcan to bring her back.
Wow, 14.
And she was on a respirator for 3 days.
I didn't even know they go that far. I didn't even know they would keep doing
I
that.
didn't know they would either. And this was like total treatment throughout the course of the evening, but like it took 5 or 6 to like bring her back to consciousness at the overdose. And then they had to continuously administer Narcan throughout the evening. And they said they ran out of Narcan on 2 floors of the hospital. And ended up total administering 14 doses of Narcan before they could stop. She had thought, so I had shot up first, of course, because she always shot me up first and then would shoot herself up. And I had fallen out, and I had fallen out so hard that like I was unresponsive, and she thought I'd overdosed.
What do you mean by falling out? I never heard that term. Passed out?
Passed out. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had passed out to the point where I was unresponsive. I nodded out, and she thought I'd overdosed and died. And she thought she was responsible. And so she decided to take the rest of what we had. So she was trying to overdose on purpose.
If she thought you had died.
So she ended up on a respirator for 3 days. And so when she came home, they were like, well, that's it. We're not doing heroin anymore. It's too risky. So we went back to only doing crack, thinking we're going to do the safe drug. We're only going to shoot up crack cocaine. And we did for months, just daily grind, steal the food, get the coke, go home, shoot up. Eventually, things got kind of desperate. I ran out of money. My partner had cut off my debit card because she'd moved out and cut off our joint account, and I didn't have any more money. So guess what we do?
I have a bad guess. I don't know. I was gonna say prostitute yourself, possibly.
Yeah. So
that's a tale too often heard. Ever since I started
those were the heydays of Backpage, right? Like, so Backpage was this
I've heard of
website.
Backpage. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah. So I don't even know what the state of it is now. I haven't tried to look. But
I think they shut it down because that was what the police were just going sting after sting after sting and Backpages.
Because it was nothing but like massage and dancing and
bullshit.
Prostitution.
Talking to you as a prostitute or former prostitute, that must be scary. It just must be scary.
I don't know. No fear when you're shooting up cocaine on a daily basis. You're just like so not aware of the danger you're putting yourself in. Because not only were we doing that, but we would rob people. We would play tricks on them, get them in the house, take their money, and then get them out of the house by telling them we were calling the police. Like we would run scams, like anything to get more money. And you just, it's like you can't even stop to fathom the danger of what you're doing, because I think it would be too much, really. But I don't even think you can feel it. I
Well,
couldn't feel anything other than I need more.
and you're probably too scared to call the police, God forbid. I mean, you can't really call the police and say,
Oh,
"Hey, I'm a prostitute, and this is what just happened to me. I need help." It,
no,
you know what I
no,
mean? It's you're
yeah,
working on
no.
the fringes of society.
You avoid the popo at all costs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, Emily always used to say, like, if I overdose, don't call the EMT, don't call, like, here's what you do. You put me in the shower, you dump ice on me, you do the sternum rub, you like, don't call the police. And she had had a second overdose. Um, and I'd called a friend and he'd come over and we'd done the whole thing and put her in the cold shower and woken her up and slapped her face and sternum rub and everything, and we're like barely keeping her conscious. Well, she wasn't really conscious, but keeping her breathing. And finally, he's like, "We can't keep doing this. We gotta call the police." And we did. And man, was she mad at me. She didn't catch charges. She was just taken to the hospital and treated, but she was super mad at me for having called. So I had this ingrained in my head, like, you never call the police, you never call the police, you never call the police. So we eventually were evicted, and my daughter wasn't living with us at the time. She was still with her godmother. And we were like, okay, well, we're gonna have to find some kind of place to live. I'm not moving to the street. I have a kid. So we kept looking, kept looking, kept looking. Well, Emily had a record. I didn't have a record, but I had an eviction, and it was impossible to find housing. And we looked for like a solid month for a new apartment and finally found one. A little private landlord who was willing to overlook everything as long as we paid cash in hand. Signed a lease on an apartment, and I got the big idea in my head that, like, we need to celebrate. At about the same time, I got an inheritance. My stepfather passed away. I hadn't talked to him in years. But he left me money. So I just got my inheritance money and we went picked up and went back to the apartment, partied hard for the entire night. And about 4 a.m, that's when we'd get real cranky with each other, after partying all night. And Emily would start to get paranoid about whether or not I'd hid some drugs somewhere that maybe she could still use. That did I really love her? Was I just in it for the drugs? Just get real accusatory. And so I was like, here, take the last of the drugs. You can do them. I'd done my half. It was her half anyway. So 4 o'clock in the morning, Emily shoots up, collapses to the floor, starts foaming at the mouth. What do I do? I can't call the police. And I just sat there, like, rubbing her sternum, pouring cold water on her, talking to her, smacking her face, like, and in the meantime, her lips turned purple. And I finally realized, oh my God, she's dying. And so I finally called the EMTs, and they were too late.
That's heavy.
Yeah,
That's some heavy shit.
yeah. So, I mean, you can see it rattles me to this day. Um, you know, I loved Emily with all my heart. Um, there was some obviously really big problems in our relationship, and it was really based in using. Um, can't say we ever would have made it without the drugs, but it doesn't mean I didn't love her. And losing her will always be my biggest regret, always. Um, and I spiraled after that. I got clean for about a week, went to her funeral, and then lost it and went right back to using. And I had just learned to shoot myself up.
I was just about to say that was the person who used to get you high. So I guess you found your way of an addict will always find a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I was never good at it. I was always terrible at it, but I found a way. I'd be a bloody mess by morning, but I found a way to get those drugs into my vein. So for the next 7 months, I used every day. I would try and get clean. I would stop. I would go to NA for like a week, and then I'd relapse. You know, I could not bear to face what had happened. And I was just in a daze. My daughter was back with me. She had been there when Emily overdosed. Um, but I and I'm grateful. I mean, I'm not grateful for her sake that she was there, because I think it obviously traumatized her too. But I'm grateful I wasn't alone there that night. Um, but you know, I continued to use and use and use and use, and my daughter was living with me, and finally, I was using to the point where I was having nightly seizures. I would use purposely to have a seizure because
Were
I
you
thought the
suicidal?
seizures felt better. Yeah, probably.
What do you mean the seizures felt better? It would get you more high?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Just like I've never done heroin, but I've heard with heroin, you feel better after throwing up.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I never threw up.
Just think about how crazy we are. You
Yeah.
literally are saying, I would like to go into a seizure because it would make me feel better and get more high. That's
Yep.
part of
And
my life. That's
I did it all the time. I would walk that
fucked up
line.
thinking.
And one night I had a particularly bad seizure, probably a grand mal seizure. And I remember coming to on my floor, and I couldn't remember my name, and I couldn't think. I was laying there thinking, what's happened? What am I? Like literally, what am I? And it took me about half hour, 45 minutes to be able to start thinking like, oh yeah, I remember my name. I remember I'm a person. I remember what I was doing. Oh yeah, I'm on a floor. And prior to those things happening in my brain, like I was laying there thinking in like angles and pictures and like stuff that didn't make sense. Like I can't even begin to describe the experience. But so I have this seizure, and it takes me like half hour, 45 minutes to come out of it. And then I realized, holy crap, like if I didn't just come like within a hair's breadth of dying, I don't know what just happened, right? Like that can't, like, I don't know what kind of brain damage we're talking about, but like that can't have been good for my brain. It scared me. So um I went back to NA again, and I tried to stay clean. I didn't, but
What
I
were the
kept
group?
going.
I was gonna say, sounds like you kept trying to go back. What
Mhm.
what were the groups like? I hear there's one common thread that I usually hear is a lot of people find them to be rigid, but it
Um,
depends on the group.
I
I
mean,
mean, it really
I
depends.
found NA very welcoming, but I mean, it's a 12-step group. It has rules. It has a program. It has, you know, we don't. They say we don't make demands. We only give suggestions, but you're expected to follow those suggestions. Otherwise you're not trying hard enough, or you haven't hit bottom. I'd hit bottom. I knew I was at the bottom. I was crawling along the bottom for all my might. But I couldn't stop, and there wasn't anything calling out to me to make me stop. Um, but the groups themselves, I think I did find people there who were warm and welcoming, and that's why I came back, was people um, that I could connect with and relate to. So I kept coming back to NA, and then one night I had another seizure, and I knocked a lamp off my table, my nightstand, with my hand. And so my daughter came in and found me mid seizure. And here I am seizing on the floor, and she's like, oh my God, I'm gonna go call 911. And I'm screaming through my seizure, like with my teeth chattering, no, 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 no. And all I can say is no popo, no popo through my chattering teeth. And she ended up calling a friend of mine instead. And they came over and like took care of me. But the next morning I came out, she was sitting on the sofa, and she just screamed in my face. Screamed in my face, don't you ever fucking do that to me again.
Sounds like the roles were reversed. Sounds like instead of a child talking to the parent, or you know what I mean. It sounds like it was
Yeah,
reversed right there. Sounds like she
yeah,
was talking to you as if you were the child in that
yeah,
scenario.
yeah. And that's a moment I will never forget. Like that will be burned into my memory. And that was April of 2017. There was an event like 2 days later, um, an NA event. And at that event, I asked somebody to sponsor me. And she said, call me every day. And so I started calling her every day, and I stayed in recovery from that moment on.
So you've been sober ever since your daughter decided to play mom to you.
Yeah, it sounds weird, doesn't it?
No,
But
I
yeah,
mean,
I mean, it was the moment that like I realized how badly I was hurting her, like how terrified she was to talk to me like that. Like I had a very shy, mild-mannered daughter, and for her to talk to me like that, it was like so beyond the pale of what like had ever happened before. It was just shocking. So I just realized like what I'm doing, like I'm gonna leave her without a mother. This kid who like just screwed up her energy to tell me, don't do that to me again. And I just I just realized that like I was gonna die, and she was gonna have no mom. And that just suddenly became unacceptable.
So what did you do at that point to get sober and stay sober? Was there anything, did you take a different approach this time, or was there just get back to what you've been doing before and just work harder?
I I think yes, I got back to what I was doing before. I went to NA this time instead of AA.
So originally you were
Um,
going to AA.
mhm,
Okay.
yeah, so I think that made a difference in that I could relate more. Um, I found a sponsor that I admired a lot, um, and that carried me for quite a while until there started to be things that we didn't see eye to eye on. And then I switched sponsors, and then I had another really great sponsor for 2 years, and now I've switched again. But um, finding sponsors in the program has been like a huge piece of like how I've stayed in recovery. The sponsors I've chosen.
Well,
And
you got to have a good open line of
mhm,
communication with your
mhm,
sponsor. You got to be able to trust them. You got to
yes,
be able to, they're there to provide a judgment free zone and just assist you in any way they can.
yep. And you got to have a rapport with them so that you feel like you can trust them because they're teaching you through their trustworthiness, and you're placing trust in them, like how to trust again, how to, because when you're out there using, you don't trust anybody, you don't trust yourself, you don't have any faith in anything. And I had to learn trust and faith and vulnerability and like all this stuff all over again. So I learned that through a sponsor, and it was hugely helpful. And I worked the steps. I've worked them multiple times. And I think that level of self inquiry, whether you do it in NA or you do it in a different program or you do it with a therapist or whatever, like I think that level of self inquiry is super important because I think you have to get to know yourself and accept like what happened in your life as an addict and accept what happened in life before your life as an addict, um, to move on and build a new life. So,
Yeah, it's good to do a self assessment, see where you're at, see what needs to be fine tuned and tweaked. And
right. Yeah, I needed to start admitting to all the trauma from my childhood and all the trauma from my adulthood. I needed to tell the truth about everything that I'd done as an addict that like I was super not proud of. I had to feel like I could forgive myself. Um, I all of that I got to through both therapy and working the steps. So so now my um experience is a little bit different. So I in the
let me
last
ask you
five
this
years, yeah.
real quick. You mentioned that you had an issue with religion. How did you work the 12 steps this time? Did how did you understand your personal higher power this time?
Well, um I had come into it this time with the idea that like I'm just going to use the group, right? A lot of people do that.
Yep, group of
Um,
drunks, God. Group of
yeah.
drunks or a group of drug addicts.
So I used that in the beginning, and then I sort of leaned into the idea that, like, okay, I don't think we as like individual human beings are like the sum total of intelligent life in the universe. Like, I think either we're all connected in some way that forms a web that's sort of greater than us, or the universe has some sort of maybe intelligent. I don't know if I believe in intelligent design so much as like a natural flow. Um, but like something is like more powerful than me for sure. I mean, the universe is more powerful for me from than me for sure, whether there's an intelligent design behind it or not. It's just a much greater, more massive thing. So I started to understand the universe to be my higher power. And that worked for a really long time. Until it didn't. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So this last year has been the biggest challenge I've had in recovery. I had a really good run of about 4 years in recovery. Life got really good. I went back to school. I met somebody in recovery and fell in love again. I became trained as a certified peer specialist. So I was working as a peer, helping other people get into recovery, which really broadened my views on recovery and beyond sort of NA and 12 step, and like helped me see other pathways to recovery and helped me understand harm reduction. And, so my world just sort of like opened up and kept improving for like 4 years. I really found my like purpose. And this past year, it started out great. I bought a house with my partner. We got married. Things were looking great. And then I'll be damned if it wasn't the same thing that brought me down all those years ago. We decided to have a baby. And the same damn thing happened.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So this time, my partner's younger than me. And so this time it was my partner that lost the baby. But of course, both partners lose the baby when you're expecting together. And this time it didn't, like NA didn't really fit or comfort me. Like the whole, it's part of your higher powers plan. Like you just gotta let go and let God. Like all that stuff just sat really not okay with me. And I realized that I've been sort of just letting the higher power things slide as long as life went well, and not really investigating it very deeply. Because it was like, oh yeah, my higher power is great to me, as long as everything was going okay.
Yep.
But when things got really tough this last couple of months, really, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me, you know? So I have been doing a more Buddhist approach to recovery recently.
Oh, it's very, yeah. I've dabbled in that myself quite a bit. Are you familiar with Refuge Recovery?
And
I
I've
just
been going to Dharma, Recovery Dharma.
Okay. I just interviewed Noah Levine of Refuge Recovery. He's the one who founded that.
Oh,
I just did
wow.
few episodes ago. Yeah, really, really cool dude. Really cool dude.
Yeah. So they're like sister programs, right? Like
Well,
Refuge
he even
Recovery and
said,
Recovery Dharma.
yeah, and he even still goes to 12-step meetings. Joking around, he goes, I'm a hater sometimes, but I'm a member that's a hater. Things the reason I like the Buddhist approach is because it's not religious and it's really more of a science of the mind. This is not going to become a sales pitch for Buddhism, but that's one of the things that we need to investigate more as addicts is our mind and our brain and what's going on inside there, what's causing the cravings. And there's a lot of stuff you can align with Buddhism, but there's also a lot of stuff you can align with Christianity, Judaism, a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have really found it to help because it fits more of what rings true for me, which is like when I lost, so my third child, the one we just lost, was a girl. So when we lost our daughter, I couldn't really accept it. It was like, but we had all this planned, and we were going to do this, and we were going to do this for her, and we had the nursery all planned. And when we lost her, it was like my world was just crushed, and I couldn't let go, and I was like swimming in depression. And then I went to a retreat, like a 12-step retreat, and everybody kept telling me, like, you just gotta let go and let God. And I would get angrier and angrier. And then I decided to check out, I think I went to a refuge recovery meeting first. And I heard, like, for the first time, like, there's pain, and then there's non-acceptance of the pain that's caused suffering.
Yep.
And I finally realized it's not the fact that we lost my daughter. I mean, that happens, and it's sad that it happens, and it sucks. But like, the fact that I was not accepting the fact that we lost her was making me suffer.
That's your root cause of the problem, the root cause of your suffering.
Right. It was just, I could not accept that, like, the future that we had been planning wasn't going to happen.
There's a
And so
saying,
I was just miserable.
yeah, there's a saying in Buddhism, I believe it's in Buddhism, that the minute you want life to be other than it is, that's when you start suffering.
Yeah. So I found a lot of peace in the last couple of months going to Recovery Dharma. And I am still going to NA. I go to one meeting a week. I go to my home group. I still sponsor in NA. I still have a sponsor in NA. They are all very aware of what I'm doing. So it's all on the up and up. And I'm content for now to have it this way, because I think it's going to keep me in recovery. And that's the bottom line, right? Is I'll have 5 years in April of continuous recovery, and I want to stay that way because I know no matter what, I don't want to go back to using because I almost died. So I'm going to stick around.
Stick around for your daughter also.
Mm-hmm.
How old is she now?
She just turned 20.
Oh, look at your smile. You could see that's your pride and joy.
She is. She really is. And, her and I have come a long way in the last 5 years. And I feel really, really blessed by her forgiveness and by her, the opportunity to have her watch me grow. And, we really love each other. We still butt heads, but we really love each other. And I wouldn't have that if it wasn't for recovery. Like, I was definitely losing her. So I'm grateful today.
Yeah. So getting towards the end here, let me ask you this. What is the biggest lesson you've learned from all of this?
Biggest lesson I've learned is that running away and numbing and hiding from the feelings that I don't want to face will ultimately always bring me down and can, in fact, kill me. And when I choose to accept and explore and allow my feelings, life is pretty okay. It's pretty basic.
Yeah, it is. And do you have any advice for people that might be listening, having a tough time? Anything you want to say to the listeners?
Oh, just the one thing I really still take from NA or any 12-step program is keep coming back. You keep trying, keep no matter how many times you fall off a wagon, you climb back on, or you pick up again when you didn't want to, or whatever, just keep trying, because whether it's through harm reduction or through 12 step or through Buddhism or through anything else, like there is a better life. There's more wellness available if you just stay alive.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Stay alive.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great interview so far. I think that we're wrapping up here. What do you think? How did you feel? How does this all feel to you?
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good to have told my story. I feel like every time I do, I pay a little homage to Emily and I make her story kind of mean something a little bit. I mean, I know it does to her family and those of us who loved her, but I think by sharing a little bit of our shared path and my story, I hope I can help someone else not go down that road.
And I'm sure we're gonna get people listening to this that you're gonna have them relate to what you've been through and definitely help them out.
Yeah, thanks.
But all right, that's all we got for today. Now, one last thing I want to say to our viewers and listeners is if you can go below, click subscribe, also give us a like. You can join us on Facebook. We've got a page and a group. Under the group, if you go to the events tab, you're going to see all of our Zoom meetings. We do them daily, sometimes twice a day, even sometimes 3 times a day. Also give us a like on the Facebook page. We're on Reddit, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. So we're all over the place. So check us out. And that's all we have for today. So until next time, folks.